It's New Year's Day, and here in Lake Charles, Louisiana, we are in full-on hurricane recovery mode, continued edition. You can see my truck is full of stuff, a job box and a ladder in the back, and every day is 7 a.m. until I can't move anymore. Getting all the stuff that Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Delta broke fixed back up. But it is New Year's Day, and on New Year's Day, it's a great time to think about what might be different. However, nothing about a year changing and a number on a calendar being different makes any difference unless you or I take some action. But it is a great day to reflect. And as I think about 2020 and reflect on what happened, many things come to mind. But the one I want to talk about right now is that there are forces at play that want to tell you and I what's real. What's the real expectation of what's going on? How should we think? How should we think and feel about events or ideas or conditions? And as I think through all the tumultuous events that happened, we had all the ones that happened in America, right? We had coronavirus, and then we have George Floyd, and then we have riots, and then we have continued lockdowns and coronavirus, and now we have an election and questions about election security and all those things. Each of those have lots of things to talk about. But what I'm struck about the most about 2020 is that the folks who communicate the most to us, the people who have the microphone the most often, they want us to think that only certain things are normal. And if you think outside of those things, well, that's kooky, bizarre, weirdo stuff. So when we get to thinking about the media, the mainstream media, and when I think about mainstream media, that's ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times. Those guys live in blue cities, and they have very much homogeneous neighborhoods, right? If you go to Manhattan or Brooklyn or Washington, D.C., it's 90%, 95% people who voted all the same way. In my city, it's 60-40, 55-45, My state was 58-42, I think, in the last election for Trump. And the media, they want to tell us how to think. In fact, they insist on it. And they do it in so many ways. So as we think about all the events of this year, media will tell you that the only way to think about coronavirus is it's the plague of the world. That there's nothing that rivals it, that everything changes, that, of course, everyone agrees that masks are vitally safe. Do you remember that back in March or I think February, even Dr. Fauci said masks are unnecessary? You don't remember that? You don't need those. And then they changed it. The Surgeon General came out, another gentleman, I don't hear much from lately. Originally they thought, well, masks are unnecessary. You have to wear an N95 mask. It has to be fitted right. And in order to filter out viruses are very small and very difficult to use a mask effectively. And the side effects are counterbalance the benefit of the mask. And then all of a sudden it became the predominant media narrative that masks are great and that lockdowns are essential. We have to social distance, we have to not go anywhere, and we have to wear a mask or we're going to cause the coronavirus to spread. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Y'all remember that? But when we look back now, we can see that the states that had severe lockdowns and mask requirements and everyone's complying, their spread of the virus is very similar to the states that had much more relaxed requirements. Golly whiz, hard to tell the difference between California and other states. In fact, states that are trumpeted as some of the leaders, Mr. Cuomo is actually writing a book about leadership during the coronavirus, and his state has the worst deaths per million of any of the 50 states, New York. And coronavirus is serious. I'm not making light of it at all. One of my loved ones is in the hospital right now, and not great. So I've had the coronavirus, sick for a few days. No one's saying it's not a serious issue, but what we are saying is that why is only one set of opinions allowed? So if you think back about 2016, we had an election then. We had Donald Trump, the outsider, won. And even before results are finalized, we have mainstream media telling us that Donald Trump was a stooge of the Russian government and that Russia and Donald Trump colluded to steal the election. And the media narrative told us that for years. And what media narratives do is they apply political pressure, and it makes it hard to buck that system. It makes it hard for politicians to. Political pressure is important. I mean, all of us are influenced by pressure, and doesn't mean that you compromise your values, but it's a factor, and you go into it. So they told us for 2, 3, 4 years, Donald Trump had colluded with Russia to steal the election. In fact, the political pressure made the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, Trump's original Attorney General, recuse himself from the investigation, right? I'll go into that another day. But he recused himself, and so he appointed Robert Mueller, a former FBI director, to be a special counsel. Robert Mueller had unlimited subpoena power. He hired dozens and dozens of professional agents, and he had I think he spent $50 million in 2 years interviewing, thousands of witnesses and millions of pieces of paper. And what did he find about Russia collusion? Donald Trump's colluding with Russia to steal the election. He didn't find anything. The media, though, breathlessly for years told us that Trump colluded with Russia to steal the election. Every day there was a new, this is the shoe that's going to drop, and this is the beginning of the end. And just go look at it. Go look and Google some compilations that people put out. I think Brent Bozell's group does a lot of those compilations of all of the tropes about how Trump and Russia and, oh my gosh, the end of the world. And then it turns out Robert Mueller didn't find anything. Even after the Mueller investigation, Adam Schiff, who's the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, stood outside of CNN's studios with a manila envelope. Says, I have in this envelope new information, new evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. So Adam Schiff had his chance. He had his hearings, his impeachment hearings, and he didn't bring out any new information. What information do we have about Trump-Russia collusion? Well, Don Jr. held a meeting, or was invited to a meeting by someone who apparently was Russia, and they ended up saying they had something on Hillary, and nothing came of the meeting, and Don didn't meet with them again. So what else do we have? Well, we have that Hillary's campaign hired a firm called Fusion GPS, and they went and hired a British spy, now discredited, named Christopher Steele. And Christopher Steele went and got with the Russians and got some disinformation about Trump. And they call that the Steele dossier. And people like James Comey and Clapper, Brennan, Comey got a subpoena from the FISA courts using this Trump dossier from Christopher Steele, discredited, didn't tell him that Hillary's campaign paid for it, didn't tell him it was Christopher Steele, a guy that was now on the outs with the CIA, not using him as an informant anymore. And they spied on the Trump campaign. Trump said, hey, they spied on my campaign, and all of the folks in the media ridiculed Donald Trump. Oh, how ridiculous. They tapped his phone. Of course, well, Trump was slightly off on the details, right? They didn't tap Donald Trump's phone, but they spied on the Trump campaign. The existing federal bureaucracy spied on the incoming administration, trying to undermine them and discredit them, saying that they're Russian spies. Do you know how terrible that is? And the media tells us that's absolutely normal. Trump colluded with Russia and all this Trump, Russia. We have 2 years of the Mueller investigation, and what did they find? They didn't find anything. And that dossier is a bag of lies. They just made it up. Russia gave disinformation about that. And did the media come out and say, oh man, we retract. We must have really made a mistake. No retractions, no nothing. Double down. So what I'm saying is they've handed us the full kimono, right? They've opened up the kimono and said, here we are. We, the media, we are turning the light on, see? And the media are saying to us, if we're listening, saying, we're not journalists anymore. Journalism used to be the curiosity, right? The journalists were skeptical about politicians, and they would go find out, go investigate, go do information, dig, look, be curious, skeptical. And now, what do we find? Every day with the Trump-Russia collusion thing, we had a new leak. An anonymous source tells us. Anonymous source from within the administration, within the FBI, within the intelligence community. Anonymous sources will tell us. Do you know what an anonymous source is worth? Nothing, man. If they won't give you their name, why would you trust anybody like that? And the reason that the media is okay with anonymous sources in this instance is that the media guys are not journalists. They are agenda-driven partisans who are pushing for one side. They live in blue states, live in blue cities, have prideful. Listen to David Brooks, right? He tells us that that the expert class of journalists and academia need to reach out to us Trump people in the hinterland because we are given to bumpkinism because we don't have the access to the expert class in the thriving blue cities. I'll find a link and put that in there. And David Brooks is just revealing what's going on inside the minds of the journalists. And that is that they don't respect people in the heartland, right? People like me who drive a truck and own a business and work with my hands and own a gun, and we're knuckle-dragging Neanderthals. That's what they think we are. And these journalists have gotten away with it. But in 2020, they showed their colors in true fashion. Trump-Russia collusion came to nothing, and the media gave ne'er a correction, a retraction. They doubled down. In fact, what they did next is found the whistleblower, right, who revealed the Ukraine call. He felt like there was a quid pro quo. Guy didn't have first-hand information; he had second-hand information, and the media just ran with it. Oh my gosh! So an impeachment came of that. The House Democrats impeached President Trump, and turns out if you look at Ukraine, we'll find something interesting. Another case that reveals something interesting about the media, which is that Donald Trump talked about. Hey, the whole point of the call was, hey, look into the Biden thing. What's the Biden thing? Well, turns out that Joe Biden, Vice President Joe Biden, was President Barack Obama's point man in Ukraine, in charge of the Obama administration's Ukraine policy. Vice President Biden was over in Ukraine, and the Attorney General of Ukraine was looking into investigating a company called Burisma, which is a natural gas extraction sales company. Now, unlike in the United States, we have publicly traded companies. There's a ton of information. You have to file a 10K, all these reports. Not so in a place like Ukraine, kind of an oligarch-run shop, and you get contracts because of your contacts and all that stuff. And Ukraine invited a guy with no gas experience and no Ukraine connections named Hunter Biden to be on their board of directors. And they paid him $80,000 a month to be on their board. That's a lot of money, in case you're wondering. I think the average income in the United States is $55,000 or something like that. So they paid him more than the average worker's wage in a month in order to be on their board. He didn't work there. He just had to attend a meeting or whatever. This is a lot of money. And President Trump asked the Ukraine. So Vice President Biden, go back. He was pressuring the president of Ukraine to fire the Attorney General because the Attorney General was corrupt, according to Vice President Biden. But what the Attorney General was doing was looking into corruption at Burisma, where Vice President Biden's son had this cushy gig. And Vice President Biden is recorded on video saying that he held out a $1 billion grant to Ukraine unless the president fired the investigator. He had 6 hours to do so. Bragged about it. Now, I would call that an exchange of value, right? So quid pro quo was the mantra there for a while they investigated President Trump. And Vice President Biden did that. He pressured the Ukrainian leader to fire the investigator who was looking into Burisma, where Vice President's son had this cushy job. Don't you want a job that makes $80,000 a month in order to attend a meeting or two? I would. That sounds pretty great. But even Hunter Biden didn't buy it. He was asked in an interview why he got that job, and he said, "Well, I guess my name is Biden. That's why." So let's keep up the story. So when President Trump asked the leader of Ukraine to look into it, what happened? Well, impeachment. That's what happened. When Hunter Biden's laptop was abandoned, and the guy who owned the laptop shop turned the laptop over to the FBI and a copy of the hard drive to the New York Post. The New York Post came out with a blockbuster story that Hunter Biden, Hunter Biden's emails seem to implicate that there's funny business, right? It needs to be investigated. There's sort of big money deals with Ukraine and with Russia and with China, where Hunter Biden, they call that influence peddling. If you go get deals because you can give access to a politician who's your relative, that's not good. It's not good at all. And Hunter Biden, the New York Post, which is the fourth largest newspaper in the country, a conservative-leaning paper, I won't call them conservative, they published a story, an expose about this. And what happened? Well, the Twitter suspended the New York Post's account. Oh, you hacker information. All of the talking heads at those places that I mentioned earlier, they said this is a conspiracy, this is untrue information, absolutely no information, no basis for this information. They had Brennan and Clapper, the former CIA and National Security Advisor chairs for President Obama, on there, and they said, this is another evidence of Russian disinformation. They said that the Hunter Biden story was Russian disinformation. Now, funny thing, after the presidential election, where President-elect Biden, that's what they're calling him, he wins the election, all of a sudden now, hey, maybe there's something to this Hunter Biden story. Interesting. So the media spiked the story. Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, Google all put the thumbs down on the Hunter Biden story until it doesn't matter anymore. And the media types, they are not honest journalists. They are naked political partisans. The entire budget of CNN ought to be an in-kind contribution to the Democrat National Committee. Those guys aren't attempting to be honest. They're attempting to be partisan. And you know what? It's America. They can be partisan if they want. This is a free country, and you can do as you like. But what they don't get to do is control the way we think. They want us to believe that we're wrong, we're off. They want to set the expectations that, and you know what 2021 tells me is they don't get that anymore. They've shown themselves to be naked partisans, and guess what? They're just wrong. They're discredited. And I want you and I to just remember that as we turn into 2021, that the media, and there's more to say. There's other groups, the federal bureaucracy, academia, our not-for-profit world, and all of the entertainment world. These guys are 95% blue, and they don't represent America. They're not a cross-section. There's no diversity. Go back to the media, for example. If you look at the donations of media people, right? They say they're journalists. Federal donations to presidential campaigns, 95% of donations from journalists go to Democrats. Ask yourself, who is a conservative in the newsroom at the New York Times? And there aren't any. Again, the guy named David Brooks, I'll put the link to his video he showed the other day. He's the supposed conservative. He's nothing, not a conservative at all. There's no diversity of thought in these places, nor is there in academia, nor is there in the not-for-profit world, nor is there in the bureaucracy, nor is there in in entertainment. These guys have the microphone, academia, the bureaucracy, the news business, and they want you and I to think that we're crazy. They are telling us that there's nothing to see here with election fraud. There is no problems at all. This is the best election ever. And, thousands of people have come forward and given affidavits saying, hey, I saw this, it's irregular. I saw this, it's bad. You remember back to the Hunter Biden story, right? There was a whistleblower. Remember the whistleblower that they trumpeted so much, saying, I think there's a quid pro quo with President Trump and the leader of Ukraine. He didn't even hear the call. He heard someone talking about the call. This was all just a setup, right? There's no, just a naked partisan inside the administration who wants to undermine President Trump. And the media says, oh my gosh, whistleblowers must be heard. Turns out if the whistleblower is a person who saw something irregular at a Democrat city like Philadelphia or Detroit or Atlanta, right? Atlanta, we have a water main break and everyone goes home and then they start recounting without Republican watchers in there. And golly whiz, I think that there's some curiosity that should happen. If there were journalists were involved, they would want to know. So let's go dig into it. Instead, it's you get a little tag on every Facebook post. The election results, elections are safe, and just go check our little fact checkers. You use your common sense to fact check. 2020 is full. There were journalists in front of burning buildings where riots took place telling us that it's mostly peaceful. There's several of these journalists standing in front of burning buildings telling us that mostly peaceful protests. And golly whiz, a lot of protests were peaceful and some were riotous. And it'd be great to tell the truth, to be honest, or to declare your biases. I'm very conservative. I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. I'm sure not pretending to be some objective, nonpartisan journalist who just tells it like I see it. And the truth is that those guys only hang out with people with like minds. They agree with each other and they live in an echo chamber, and that echo chamber has turned the journalism business to rot. Don't buy them. They are not journalists anymore. They're naked partisan political operatives. 2021, we've turned a new chapter, and we're not going to let those people tell us what's normal. You decide what's normal for you. Freedom is better.